Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming to this series Alexander Pepkov, who is a geopolitical analyst commenting on various topics having to do with Israeli politics and the geopolitics of the Middle East. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you too for inviting me.
Is it fair to say that on October 7th, 2023, it was Qatar that attacked Israel? Would you find that a fair statement?
In my opinion, no. The issue is slightly, but not by much, more complicated.
Okay.
In the same way that George Soros appears to be using his own money for his own aims, once you take a slightly deeper look, you're going to find out that he's nothing more than a middleman for what used to be USAID until Trump shut them down. In a similar way, the Qatari government is not an independent actor, although they appear to be or try to appear to be, but actually they are just promoting the foreign policy of, it's hard to pinpoint who, but it's the Anglo-American establishment, let's call them that. And they are allowed to make a lot of money through specific deals, and their profit margin is ensured through OPEC, and then they are told to spend some of that money in specific pathways that are dictated by shadowy elements within the, let's call it, NATO framework.
Interesting. So if I can try to translate what you're saying, correct me if you disagree, it sounds like you're saying that Qatar is actually a tool for laundering the money of the Anglo-American establishment.
Yes.
For their foreign policy purposes.
Yes. The economic foundation of, let's call it, the Anglo-American empire is international trade. And they choose which areas have conflict, and through that conflict they can both reduce trade in the area, and on the other hand lower the cost of raw materials such as oil. Because if if an organization like ISIS controls oil wells, they will sell that oil at below market prices.
Within a model like this, how do you explain the attack of October 7th, 2023? The fact that the Americans have their CENTCOM's headquarters in Qatar means that nobody can attack Qatar, certainly not Israel. So in a sense, it seems fair to say that on October 7th, Qatar attacked Israel behind an American shield. It seems to me that one interpretation here is that Israel got attacked by the U.S. on October 7th, 2023. Yes. And so according to your model, what would be the goal of the American bosses in attacking Israel via Qatar? So in your model, those would be people in the American power structure?
Yes. Okay. In the international power structure, to be more precise.
Which is dominated by the U.S. bosses,
yes,
isn't it?
The U.S. is more of the main financial source, but it's not the main ideological source, let's call it that way. Now, the question, who wanted that, you can approach it from several angles. The obvious one would be the leftists who wanted to force Israel into concessions of some sort, whether it's a two-state solution, a three-state solution, or just weakening Israel and forcing an economic crisis or mass immigration or something. The deeper level is that maybe they were interested in Israel over-retaliating and doing what Trump proposed a few weeks ago of completely conquering Gaza, expelling the jihadi supporters out of it, and resettling it as a Jewish settlement, and finally closing the Gaza issue. You could have a further interest of somebody who was interested in destabilizing all of the Sinai, because outside of the lights of media cameras and international attention, in the last 10-15 years, the insurgency against the Egyptian army in the Sinai was far more severe than the battles between the US Army and the Taliban ever was. They have more casualties, they use more hardware, but because it's in the middle of the desert and nobody filmed it, then both sides pretend it didn't happen.
It seems to me the simple-minded hypothesis, when you find U.S. bosses collaborating or even pushing jihadi forces to launch an attack on Israel, which seems to be what happened here, and let me tell you why I think this is the proper way to describe it, is that Qatar is impossible to defend. Qatar is a tiny little peninsula of sand, entirely flat. It can only be defended if it has a U.S. military base there. If it didn't have that, Saudi Arabia, Iran, almost any regional power around Qatar would have conquered it a long time ago. So, because it has the largest gas reserves in the world, and it's obviously a succulent prize for any regional power. So, given that Qatar cannot survive as an independent state without that U.S. military base, it seems to me that the U.S. bosses have the power to direct Qatari foreign policy. Yes. All they have to do is tell Qatar what to do, and Qatar has to jump. So if Qatar is free to finance international jihadism, and in particular to build Gaza into a Hamas terror structure, which is what they did with their money, then it seems to me the logical inference is that this is all the policy of the U.S. bosses, because they could change it in a second.
In almost every country, in every Muslim country that you look at, you have some sort of jihadist insurgency, and you have a government fighting against the jihadist insurgency, and it would be the economic interests of the United States to promote that jihadist insurgency and then sell the solution to the problem to the local government to make sure that both of them are kept within some sort of balance and not achieving actual peace and stability.
They're promoting jihadism. If jihadism is in power, they like it to be stable. If jihadism is not in power, then they promote jihadi insurgency. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. What you're describing, they control both the inflow and the outflow of jihadist activity within areas. So
you're still talking about the U.S. bosses.
I'm talking about the people who make foreign policy choices in the United States.
That's who I mean.
I'm not sure I would call them U.S. bosses because their interests are not aligned with the national interest of the United States.
Oh, well,
they only appear to be.
Okay, so they're not U.S. patriots.
Yes.
But they are the bosses. They make the state level decisions, so they're the bosses. Okay. The people running the United States in the first half of the 20th century happen to have been eugenicists.
Yes.
This has been documented with great detail by historian Edwin Black, who's the great historian of eugenics. And what he finds is that the biggest industrialists in the Anglo-American aristocracy, the Anglo-American power elite, they are real aristocrats in Great Britain and functionally aristocrats in the United States. These people were all ideologues of the eugenics movement. And the eugenics movement is the movement that produced German Nazism. And Edwin Black can show that giant amounts of money, diplomatic support, everything were flowing from the United States and Great Britain, from these great industrialists and the aristocrats in Great Britain, to the German eugenics movement that became German Nazism, right?
Yes.
And they were even assisting the German Nazis during the war after Pearl Harbor, right? So you have a eugenic ruling elite in the United States. They were never removed from power. They stayed in power. The Allies, the Western Allies in World War II, refused to bomb the death camps or even the railroads leading to the death camps. They protected the extermination process. So, given that those people were not removed from power, and given that they returned the Nazis to power in Germany, this is also relatively famous for some of us. It's the historian Christopher Simpson documented that after World War II, the CIA was created by absorbing tens of thousands of Nazi war criminals that formed part of Reinhard Gehlen's organization.
The Odessa Network. Yes.
No. The Odessa Network was
one of the sections that was responsible for the more international levels. Exactly. By the way, this channel should invest some resources in making a show on the amount of Nazis that were sent as delegates to Iran in the 50s to prop up their industry, and how these industries became the Iranian military industry of today. You would find quite a lot of names there.
Very interesting. And who sent those Nazis to Iran?
The same people who were running Western Germany at the time.
Okay.
The Allies.
Exactly. A few months before the October 7th attack, they had released something like $6 billion for Iran. And after the October 7th attack, they started sending money to Hamas. So it seems to me the general picture, if we see the same eugenicists who produced German Nazism in the post-war supporting jihadism, and remembering that there was a very strong alliance between the German Nazis and the jihadis during World War II, why shouldn't the interpretation be that U.S. bosses are trying to kill the Jews again?
It is both correct and immaterial, because let's go back to the other point I asked if you want to mention, the Kalergi plan. It is unfathomable for people who have not researched the issue, but the main supporters of communism are the billionaires. Because when you have some sort of economic system that is based on actual money, you have a chance to lose it. But if the only parameter of whether or not you have property is your standing within the one political party, you can never run out of money. You can always be on the what we have in Israel called budgetary pensions. And when you're a billionaire and you own assets, the state owns the assets, and you ensure through your power within the party that you keep control of them through the political establishment. That is So
it's not technically your money, but you spend it as if it were.
Yes, that is the essence of fascism. Fascism is just corporatism,
yes,
where the supposed strong leader is just the head of a council that is composed of the biggest corporations in the country. And the deeper issue is the Kalergi plan. What is their objective? They want to...
Tell us what is this plan exactly?
There was this Kalergi, I don't remember, he has a long name. He was half Austrian, half Japanese, and obviously people were racist towards him in Central Europe. So he composed a plan. It came up after all of these ethnic rivalries after World War I, between World War I and World War II. And he said that the way to force Europe into peace through total peace, and total peace can be only enforced by the world government, is to remove the national identity of everyone in Europe. And the way to do that he proposed, is to flood Europe with hundreds of millions of immigrants from Africa, Asia, and from anywhere else, so that after several generations, people will not have a national identity. And these jihadist forces are simply a militant wing of the broader movement that we saw very well Germany, the Scandinavians, and especially France, now Britain too, massively supporting, at the expense of their own taxpayers, bring as many immigrants from Asia and Africa into their countries.
It appears that your model is that the Western bosses are trying to destroy the democratic experiment of the West, the modern democratic experiment.
Yes.
And so they are giving Westerners a choice between two different kinds of fascism. So we go back to traditional Western fascism, or we go forward into jihadi fascism.
Exactly.
But either way, what they want is fascism. They
Yes.
they want democracy destroyed and totalitarianism imposed.
Exactly.
I happen to think that the Jewish people are key in Western civilization.
Yes.
We wouldn't have a democratic experiment if it weren't for the influence of Jewish ethics on Western civilization. So it seems to me that it's not immaterial, it's strategic. You guys are very important, because they understand that if you get rid of the Jewish people, you can collapse the entire West into totalitarianism. Yes. And they already did it in World War II. They killed the European Jews and they enslaved the Europeans. And now they're going to try to kill the Jews again, I think, and enslave all of us, all Westerners. If
you try to take the essence of the Jewish religion, the obvious would be the 10th Commandments, which would be the most important one. I think the first one. And a lot of people seem to not be able to quote it exactly. So
that's also true. Yeah.
you can check in your Bible, JJ, your God, is the one who removed you from the land of Egypt, from a house of slaves. So what does it mean? Egypt, until the stupid communists built that giant dam that blocked the Nile, was the most fertile place on the planet. It was the easiest place to live in, to grow food, to have a family, all that. But it was a house of slaves. And God chose for you, for the Jewish person, to remove you out of there. So we often have this balance between liberty and safety. God chose for us to prefer liberty over safety. And that runs against the totalitarian model, because they always sell you the safety. That's what all the dictators promise. And you know, the safest place to be is inside a prison cell.
Jewish civilization was born in a slave revolt. Jewish law was born in a slave revolt. And what we Westerners have learned over the centuries from the Jewish people is how to fight for freedom.
Yes.
How to fight for our individual rights and to liberate ourselves from oppressive government. So I think the totalitarians of other centuries and the totalitarians of this century have always understood that if they want to enslave all of us, all Westerners, they have to start by destroying the Jewish people.